Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm David Bird with Reality Reimagined. I'm an award-winning photographer and Photoshop artist that specializes in fantasy composite art. This is the piece of artwork we're going to be making in today's tutorial. It uses 3 pieces of stock that are free from Adobe stock at the time of this recording. All you have to do is make a free account with them and you'll be able to download those. In the description below on this video are the file numbers for all 3 of those pieces of stock, as well as a link to the Google Drive where you can download the image that I have captured of my wonderful friend Danielle, the fantasy character in this piece of art. In the description below is also a link to a specialty set of brushes that I have made for Photoshop. We'll be using a new set of HAZE brushes that I have made in this tutorial to be able to make all of this. And the reason why I'm making the tutorial is because I debuted the HAZE brushes last weekend and I've gotten a lot of amazing messages from people sharing artwork and asking me for more inspiration and ideas on how to continue to use them. So that's what this tutorial is all about. So make sure to go to the description below to download all of those images. With that, let's dive into the Photoshop and get to work making this piece of art. So to get started with the art making, I have to ask myself 2 existential questions. What is the story and who is the subject? Well, the subject is Danielle and I want the audience to pay attention to her. And as far as the story is concerned, I think the story can just stay Danielle. I don't need to create a fully realized world of fantasy behind her. We can just simply make a cool background and let her be the audience's focus. So from a composition perspective, I think she can stay right in the center of this document. I don't need to move her around. Now, last weekend I had a 2-part episode where I talked about using the leading lines of the subject themselves to help you dictate the document and the composition and where stock elements and graphics can go in the composition to drive the audience's focus back to the subject. If you have not seen those videos, take a look at the card above. It will take you to that when you're done with this one today. But ultimately, her staying in the center, I think we can just build some of these graphics around her and it doesn't have to be overly complex. So let's get started with making those. I'm going to grab our first piece of stock from Adobe. I'm hitting V for the move tool, holding the shift key, clicking anywhere in the picture and dragging it up to the tab that says Danielle. And because I'm holding shift, no matter where I put my mouse, it will drop that new texture precisely into the center. Now I need to rotate this piece of stock so it's in a vertical orientation to fit the document. And I also want to resize it to make sure that it fits everywhere inside the document. With the move tool, make sure that this box is checked that says show transform controls. That will show you these boxes around the corners and that's how you transform it. So I'm going to put my cursor to the edge. Now if I were to just click and start rotating, it would do it in a free form and a fluid kind of way. I want to do it in even degree increments. So I'm going to hold the shift key and start rotating it until I get into that perfect vertical up and down alignment. And then I'm going to come to one of the corner transform controls, hold the Alt or Option key and click, and that will resize all of them at the same time so I can make sure the entire texture is inside the document. Then hit enter to accept the transformation. Now I need to realign the stock in layers window so we can actually see Danielle. I can see Danielle. Can you see? I can see Danielle. Anyway, so I'm going to bring the stock down to the bottom of the layer stack so that Danielle will be at the top and that way she will always be visible. Now let's grab our second piece of stock, the golden texture, and bring this into the scene. V for the move tool, holding shift, dragging it up to the tab that says Danielle. Letting go, it's dropped right into the precise center. I need to rotate it and make sure it fits the entire scene. Holding shift to rotate, and then holding the Alt or Option key and grabbing that right corner transform control and resizing it, hitting enter to accept the transformation. Now I rotated this counterclockwise and that was actually very important. And the reason why I did that will be the subject of my final thoughts at the end of this video. But let's continue forward now with using the HAZE brushes to make something cool. The reason why I made the HAZE brushes is not, and why I use them is it's not necessarily just to do special effects like creating haze and fog or adding more smoke around fire and things like that that I do in the fantasy composites that I create. It's also to use them to create new edges, new perimeters to pieces of stock that make them, for lack of a better phrase, a cool graphic. And that's the whole point of having specialty brushes, is that the brushes themselves don't have to be something that you just use in a traditional sense of stamp the brush into the scene and call it good. You can use the brushes to be able to create new edges, and that's where the layer mask system comes into play with Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and create a layer mask for this piece of stock, and I want to make a hide all layer mask or a black mask. So to do that, I'm going to come down to the mask icon here at the bottom of the layers window, hold Alt or Option and click it, and that will make the black mask. Now when I paint white onto it, it will reveal that golden texture. So let's grab our first haze brush. I'm going to hit B for brush, and come down to the Haze brush pack, and let's pick a brush. So the brushes on the brushes are identical. The ones on the left stay in their orientation as you see them. The ones on the right, they will rotate and change their size every time you click. So in this case, let's grab this one. I like that one. That's fine. And it's in a landscape orientation. I want it to be in a vertical orientation, so I can actually manually change that by holding the left or right arrow keys. But just like rotating the stock, it will do it in a fluid free form. So I want to do it in even degree increments. So I'm going to hold the shift key, then hit the left arrow key, and it will rotate the brush head so I can get it into that position. Now, make sure I'm on the layer mask. Make sure my foreground color is set to white so it will begin to reveal the golden texture, and I want to make sure that my opacity and flow are set to 100%. Then I'm going to use the right and left bracket keys on the keyboard to make the brush bigger or smaller. In this case, it's at its biggest, which is 5,000 pixels, and then I'm going to simply just start clicking into the scene and painting this. And I'm using my traditional mouse with my computer to do this instead of my Welcome Intuos Pro tablet, because the tablet has pressure sensitivity. So the lighter the pen touches the tablet, the lighter that the brush is actually going to work with this on the layer mask. I want full control, so I'm going to use the mouse. So I'm going to start clicking and just building up this perimeter around Danielle. Like there's this golden fire of texture and light coming out from around her. Now, even though I have a flow and opacity of 100%, the brush itself is meant to put down a little bit of paint and not a whole lot, so that you can build it up and get control. So as I continue to click into the center, it's adding more paint at that pure 100% flow and opacity where we see the full texture. And this is where now I'm going to reduce the size of my brush just a little bit and just paint out a little bit more around the edges and get a good amount of that inner fire, so to speak, around her. And using the haze brushes in this way, we have made a cool new graphic around her that is simply just using the layer mask system as a gateway of what we are able to see, and the brushes, so of course to make that cool perimeter itself. But now what I want to do is to be able to help that perimeter stand out just a little bit more, and there's a couple of different techniques that we can put into this to be able to create this. Let's first go to the easiest one, which is to give the new perimeter of this layer mask an outer glow. So I'm going to come down to the FX tab at the bottom of the layers window and choose outer glow. Of course you can't see it because my face is covering it up, but it's in that little window. It's going to pull up the layer style window. Now we can set the parameters for our outer glow. So right now it's on a blending mode of normal. Let's leave that. Opacity set to 100%. That's great. It's choosing the color black right now by default because that was my foreground color, but we can choose any color we want it to be. But let's actually go ahead and leave it black because it's helping stand out just a little bit more, and that's the whole goal of this. Further down, make sure the technique is on softer. Spread is set to 0%. That's always my recommendation when you add a glow, both inner and outer, and then just change the size of it. So at this point, 113 pixels, let's increase it so we just get a little bit more of that separation. If you look at the actual window itself, you can see that we're building up some of that dark outer glow. It's almost like dropping a shadow, so to speak, underneath the new perimeter itself. So that's a simple way to create some of that definition around it, but there's actually another way, and this is one that I don't know if a lot of folks fully realize and understand, but it's to use levels adjustments. So levels adjustments can be done on anything in Photoshop, where we essentially take the information of light data in the image and increase the shadows, the highlights, or the midtones. We can move those around within the data to make the image darker, brighter, or change the midtones. In this case, you can do the same thing with a layer mask, but it doesn't really add light to the scene. It just changes the shape of the mask itself. So let me demonstrate. I've selected the layer mask. I'm going to hit Control or Command and the letter L for levels. It's going to bring up the levels window. This is our shadows, our highlights, and our midtones. As I move these triangles around left, right, and in the middle, or wherever I move them, that's going to change the light data that's in this, or in this case, it's going to start adding more black if I move the shadows in, add more white if I bring the highlights in. The midtones will do the same thing, but in a different form. So if I take the shadow slider here and start pulling it to the right, if you look at the layer mask itself here, notice that it will start adding more black. The white paint and where we painted is getting smaller and smaller. Of course, you see it visually on the screen itself as well. So this is a wonderful way to get immediate feedback visually of what you're doing. So in case you paint a little bit and you don't necessarily like what you painted, you can undo the painting, of course, and make that easy, but you can also do a levels adjustment change to the mask and start changing that shape of it. But what's really cool cool is if I bring in the highlights. As I minimize the highlights of this scene and increase them, the edge becomes more defined. And we get a really cool shape, I think, that has some of that chiseled, embossed kind of feeling that is a result of the haze brush. We're just changing the nature of the mask itself. And this could feed into the story too, to a certain degree. If you think about it like Danielle's some fantasy world Indiana Jones, and this is like a map segment behind her, and I could throw in some textures and a compass and ancient this is actually really kind of neat idea. Anyway, so the point being is that this brush and a simple technique like a levels adjustment in Photoshop can give you new defined perimeters and patterns, and I really dig that. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the shape as it is for now. Maybe decrease this just a little bit. We'll change the black point just a touch so we get some of that cool shape, or we can go back to more of that fiery feeling, that ambiguous edge to it. I leave it up to you for your imaginations. In this case, let's try to find a happy marriage between the two worlds. So I'm increasing the white point just a little bit. I think that looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now let's continue forward and bring in another piece of stock, our final element here. And I have to choose one of these graphics. And I kind of dig this one here in the middle. Let me get off my haze brush right now because it's really visually distracting in this tutorial. Let's go back to a soft round brush for just a moment. And it's really big, so let's make it small. So you know what? I like this one a lot. I like all of the tendrils and so forth that are coming out of it. I also like this triangle. And this triangle, our human eyes want to complete the shape. So if we think about this, I'm envisioning this being behind Danielle with her head being at the top. So these other points that will be visible in the document, they're going to kind of subliminally push us up to her face. So I think this is the play. So to make a selection of this, I'm just simply going to come over to the lasso tool and just trace around until I get a complete selection all the way. There we go. Now I have a selection around this. I want to make it its own layer. So I'm going to hit Control or Command letter J to duplicate. Now I have a duplicate here. Hit V for the move tool, as we've done before. Bring it into our document. Holding Shift, it's going to drop it right into the center. Now it's warning me that this document is in 8-bit and the document of Danielle that we're working in right now is in 16-bit. And it's just a simple warning to tell you that the bit depth data is different. I strongly recommend that you work in 16-bit as much as you can because it allows you so much more options for colors, and that Photoshop will be able to access more colors in the scene. It just makes your artwork stronger. But for this simple graphic, it's not that necessary that we convert the graphic stock to 16-bit. We can just leave it as 8-bit as a JPEG. Now I need to resize this so that we can see it into the scene. And I think right about there looks pretty good for overall positioning. Hit Enter to accept the transformation. And again, that subliminal is that the triangle is pushing us into Danielle and letting the audience kind of see her and stay with her. I think that one's really cool, but I might want to try that other one as I make other iterations of this, and I'm so excited to see what you all create as well. But in this case now, we need to change the blending mode of this so that it will work with the scene. So typically, one of the best blending modes to use is screen when you're bringing in a graphic that has a dark background, because screen tells Photoshop to ignore the color black from that luminosity hue perspective. But in this case, the background itself is not pure black, which is why we're still seeing some white edges around this. So what I need to do is to take this background of the graphic and make it darker. And we can utilize levels adjustments as we just did a moment ago. So I'm going to hit Control or Command and the letter L for levels. And then I'm going to increase the shadows here. And as you can see, there's not a lot of data here until we get to this spike, which is the spike of the histogram. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this over. And as I do, notice how that background is slowly disappearing. Part of that is because we're on the blending mode of screen. The other part is we just essentially made all the shadows in this piece of stock significantly darker, making the background darker. Therefore, it's hidden because of the blending mode of screen. Hit OK, and now we have our graphic. But I want to work with the graphic to infuse it into the scene in the same perspectives that we've been doing everything else, and that's again turning back to the haze brushes. So I'm going to put a layer mask onto this. In this case, I'm going to make a white layer mask or reveal all. Hit B for brush, go up to the haze brushes, grab a new one. Not hair brushes, not the aura brushes. We might use those in a moment, who knows. let's grab this one. This one is one that will rotate every time I click on it and make different shapes with it. So I'm increasing its size, and I'm going to change the flow of my brush. Instead of keeping it at 100%, let's go to 30%, and that gives us just more ability to build this up. Now I want to change my foreground color from white to black by hitting the letter X. So as I paint black onto this white layer mask, it will start to hide the graphic, and it will give the illusion that it's working into the scene. So I'm using my traditional mouse and just clicking around the scene. Notice how the brush rotates each time that I click. We're getting some of that paint built in. I'm letting the computer catch up a little bit. I'm going to take my flow to 50% for purposes of the video, just to go a little bit faster with this, so we can make some of the edges disappear and make it feel like it's scratchy and working through that cool texture and so forth. And again, you could do this with just the traditional round, soft round brush in Photoshop, but the HAZE brush does it in a pattern that really works into this idea that this is an ancient background and relic and so forth, and just creates some more of that illusion and some more of that interest. So all of that combined, I think, looks really good. Let's add one more thing to this that is a typical thing that I add all the time in my artwork, which is a vignette. And a vignette is a wonderful way to push the audience's focus into the subject. So my favorite way to create a vignette is to make a solid color adjustment layer that is pure black. RGB values are set to 0. Hit OK. And then change the blending mode of this from normal to soft light, and that's going to tell Photoshop to make everything significantly darker because we chose the color black, but we can still see some of the stuff in the background. And now with this white layer mask, we can see the entire effect of this solid color adjustment layer. I need to paint black on it to take it away. I can use the HAZE brushes again, stop beeping at me, my computer, and choose one that lets me start painting black onto this mask to take things away. Now the flow of this brush right now is set to 100%, so as I click, it's going to rotate and start taking that away. And I can build it up because it's not a pure transfer of the paint. I'm going to change the flow of the brush now to 10%, make the brush a little bit smaller and just refine the edge a little bit. And so we get some of that pure blackness gone just a little bit, letting the computer catch up just a touch here. Actually, I have a very powerful computer, but when I record these tutorials, it takes a lot of the video card system resources to be able to record it as well. So things sometimes can slow down, just depends. All right, so I think that looks cool. And again, think about this. We created a new layer of black. We changed the blending mode so we could see through some of that to the other layers we put together. But by simply adding the illusion, using the HAZE brush, of more darkness around the edge, it can depending on how you see it, it can look like we're painting more bright blues into the scene. We're just creating more negative space, if you will, by adding more black, and it gives that existing texture and stock a way to come up and through to the audience's focus that creates that illusion. So ultimately, those elements combined, paying attention to color harmony and the triad and so forth, it all looks really good. I think I want to add one more. I love the red jacket, but I want to add something else in the background, because to me, the more that you can add to this, especially when you're making a stylized graphic piece of art like this, the better. You just don't want to go too far, as Ian Malcolm said in Jurassic Park. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So in this case, I want to add more, but it might cause some problems. So, and I'm actually spitballing this one. So let's hit B for brush, and let's go to... we could add some hair to Danielle, but I don't want to add hair into the back. Let's add some of the Aura brushes. So the Aura and Flares Editions 1. Let's add some brushes. And ooh, we could add like the 3 bars behind her, or the big bars. Let's do the big bars. So this one has a soft edge, although her body's going to cover that middle one. So we'd really only see those edges. So let's not use those. Those would be cool though. We could do a triangle, and we've already got a triangle into the scene, so let's not do that. Ooh, circular ones. Yes, the circular, and there's some really cool circular. These circular brushes, I love these. I use these in a lot of my fantasy composite artwork. Yes, let's use this one. Okay, cool. So we've got the brush. Now we need to choose what we're going to do with it. Let's use the same golden texture, but let's change its color so it doesn't blend in with the existing one we already have. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the golden texture layer by hitting Control or Command the letter J. Now it made a living duplicate of it, including the layer mask itself. So right now, I'm going to fill the layer mask. My foreground color is set to black, so I'm just going to hold Alt or Option and hit the backspace key. That'll fill the entire mask with black. I want to make a hue saturation adjustment layer and have it affect this new piece of stock that we just created. So I'm going to come down to the adjustment layer window, choose hue saturation, and it's putting it here right above this stock. It's also pulling up the properties window so we can see the controls themselves. We need to do something very important here, which is to create a clipping mask, which will tell Photoshop that this adjustment layer of hue saturation can only affect the layer it's clipped to. Right now, if we were to make some changes, it would affect all the layers that are beneath it in the layer stack window. To create that clipping mask, there's a couple of different hotkey functions, but we can use this one here that's in the properties window. This one, when I click it, it now adds this little arrow icon saying that this hue saturation adjustment layer is clipped to this layer and will only affect that one. So with it clipped there, now I can change the hue, and I'm going to choose a color of probably red, and we'll further change this here in just a moment, but we can't really see the change because I turned the mask black. So select the layer mask, make sure that I'm painting with my foreground color set to white, so hitting X to change that, position the brush. Let's increase its size just a little bit, right about there. My flow is at 10%. I'm going to change my flow to go to 100% by hitting Shift and the number 0, and that's the hotkey combo to change flow to 100%. And I'm going to stamp one time. Now it's painting teal because we changed the hue, but now let's go back to the hue saturation adjustment layer, click the icon, and change the hue. Go to, yeah, I like this. Do I go to more maroon red, which is matching the jacket? Do we go to a more pure, the red orange? I like that because we've already got the triad of red on the jacket, the blue and the gold, but we're adding another balance between those, so to speak. And I like that. I like that graphic. That's really cool. Okay, so we could continue forward adding sparks and fire or the Indiana Jones ideas, which I'm totally going to do when I'm done recording this tutorial. But anyway, at this point, I think it looks good. We've created those interesting graphics that I know I'm selling the brushes, but really you can only make these kinds of graphics in this way with these brushes. There's other brushes that you could use. You can use some of the traditional brushes in Photoshop and so forth, but for an affordable price point for these brushes and seeing the multiple ways you can use them, and they are truly limitless, we can create some interesting effects. Now, the last thing that I want to do is to give this a color grade, and I'm going to use the Reimagined panel, which is an art plugin for Photoshop that I created. And it functions on the three principles, the three fundamentals of Photoshop to me, which are color, luminosity, and detail. So it gives you the option to create immediately first, step one, a color grade. You can choose any of these four styles and you'll get to see them. And then if you don't like them, you can click another style and it would create it for you. Then it goes down to the second section of luminosity values, and then the last section for details, color, luminosity, and detail. So let's go ahead and choose like style 3. It's a simple brown earth tone one. Yeah, I like that one a lot. I think that one looks really cool. It creates the layers for it that gives you the color grade. You have control over these. You can change the opacity and work with them in other ways and tools in Photoshop to be able to create some interesting results. But just simply to demonstrate, if you want to choose another style, just click style 4. This one's teal and orange, and then it'll create the new one, delete the, oh, that's actually kind of cool too, because the teal is working with the blue. Ooh, I'm torn. Style 3. I like them both. These four styles, by the way, are the color grades I've used in my work for years. So of course I like them because I made it. So anyway, let's stay with style 4. I think that's fine. Let's move on to luminosity values. So I'm going to go ahead and choose an intensity of light for the matte effect. If you want to try the others, just simply click them and it will create those for you. Let's go ahead and do a light intensity for contrast. General pass, let's do even. So this is going to make a sharpness to the entire scene that's in an even intensity. I dig that. And then for the final sharpen, let's go ahead and do even again. This one is super intense for this final sharpening, but it comes automatically with a black mask or hide all, so you can paint white on it to reveal it where you want it to be. So I'm going to go back to a traditional round brush for this. Of course, you could use the HAZE brushes or the Aura brushes or whatever to do all of this, but let's go ahead and paint white. And we're painting it with 100% flow and opacity. I typically just paint over the eyes, the bottom of the nose, and the lips themselves, sometimes the hair, just to make sure those are the sharpest elements in the scene. scene that again pulls us into Danielle and pulls us into the subject. Now with all of this created, I want to do one more vignette because I just want it there. It'll push the audience's focus in. So make that solid color adjustment layer, pure black, hit OK, change the blending mode to soft light. And in this case, I'm going to use the gradient tool, which is the typical way that I make the the vignettes, and I'm choosing a radial gradient, making sure that I'm using a gradient that is my foreground color set to transparency. So it will use whatever color it is. In this case, it's white right now. I need to switch that to black. So I'm going to hit the letter X and switch my foreground color to black. Come back up here to choose that gradient. We went off of it for a second. So again, black to transparency, so it'll fade into nothingness. Radial gradient, I'm going to change the opacity to be 30%, which is typically what I do for these gradients. And now just start painting black in circles on the mask to take that vignette away until we pull the audience's focus into Danielle. And there we go. The art is done. We've made a specialty cool kind of a graphic that fits a little bit of the fantasy of this. It still lets the story be about Danielle, and all of it comes about by using these specialty brushes that I've created for Photoshop. So with that, let's conclude this tutorial today with some final thoughts. So for my final thoughts, I talked earlier about why I chose to rotate that piece of golden texture to counterclockwise, rotating it to document left. And it's because it was brightest on the left and darkest on the right. And the same lighting pattern in the image, the key light is on camera left and the fill light is on camera right. So the brightest light source is on the left. I know that may seem to some like, well, duh, whatever, but the point is this is crucial to make simple decisions like this when you're creating any type of artwork. Even if you're not doing something like this with graphics and fantasy and all that stuff, if you just have a normal portrait and you're doing a retouch to it, ask yourself simple questions. What is the story? Where does the audience need to look? Do all of the elements of the things that I am adding into this go into harmony and augment the subject in the original image? Are they taking focus away from the subject? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So ultimately, when you have that discipline, when you're working in digital photo editing, it's going to service you so much more and create stronger artwork for you than any of the elusive techniques and tools in Photoshop that you think you may not know and you think it's holding you back from making great artwork. What holds you back is asking those simple questions. And once you have the answers to those simple questions, learn why things work in Photoshop. Understand why these things need to be combined together so that you can produce the results that you see in your imagination. That concludes this video for today. If you like the content you found in it, please make sure to give the video a like and consider subscribing to the channel because new content debuts each week in photography and Photoshop education. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell icon to be notified of that new content when you return to the YouTubes. Make sure to go to the description below to see the links to get the brushes and the images and so forth so you can make all this artwork. Share it with us. Make sure that you tag Reality Reimagined and or Danielle on social media, both on Instagram and Facebook when you share the artwork. Thanks so much for watching today, and until next time, I'll see you out there in the world of Photoshop.